This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Zain Lakhani on the show. He is got a technology background in fintech and climate tech, and we're going to talk a lot about how AI technologies are kind of advancing that going forward and what his ideas are. He's also the founder of Lightci, which is a software consultancy, which we're going to talk a little bit about that too. Anyway, with all that being said, Zain, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, John. Great to be here.
Yeah, man, if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background and kind of what drove you to technology and where did Lightci come out of this?
Yeah, totally. So I started in engineering when I was quite young. Started the way a lot of South Asians start in Canada. I got put into robotics by my parents, and then slowly over time started having summer internships in the engineering field. Ended up moving out to SF when I was 16 to work for a drone company and then a climate tech company after that, and then kind of just progressed from there. A couple of years ago, I was working at a fintech company called Snap Commerce. We basically build secured credit cards. So the idea was you'd have a credit card where you don't need to have credit. So it'd build credit as you swipe and take money directly out of your bank account. So that's kind of my background. About a year and a half ago, started Lightci. Obviously started by moonlighting, as a lot of people do, and then slowly to something full time. So that's a little bit about my background. It's been a weird couple of years, lots of hectic growth, but all good things.
Yeah. So a lot of people that listen to the show are, obviously software developers, engineers, technology people, and we do a lot of side hustles and moonlight a little bit as well. What was that transition like, and what made you decide to, go out on your own to begin with?
Yeah, so it wasn't actually just me. I had a buddy who was working with me at Snap at the same time. His name is David, and I told him about this idea. I was like, this is kind of what I'm doing in my spare time. And his first reaction was, why are you still here? Why wouldn't you just go out and do it on your own? So that's kind of what kicked me into high gear. And then after that, the logo started landing, which definitely helped. The team started growing, and it just got to a point where I couldn't do two things at once. I felt my time getting split. I was kind of okay at both things, but not great at either. And it just made sense to kind of take the leap. It was super scary, but ended up working out.
Yeah, it's very scary when you're going from kind of that steady income to now I have to make sure this works, because this is where all the income comes from.
Yeah, exactly. Like the first thought I had was like, oh man, I've got a mortgage. I don't know how to pay myself. I don't know how to take money out. What am I going to do? And it was definitely scary. Luckily, I had smart people around me to help me handle it, but it was definitely a weird leap.
Yeah, for sure. So when you decided to go out on your own, and you had that friend that gave you that I guess kick to get started, which is really important for us all to have someone like that. What was the next step to really growing that client base and getting something that was real?
Totally. It was all network driven. So I just looked at the people I knew and the people that they knew, and I thought, first of all, what is the problem that I'm trying to solve? And then second of all, how do I make it valuable to the people that I'm talking to? And that's kind of evolved and changed over time. It started off as, we build great teams. We'll help you find top-tier talent. We'll place them inside the company, kind of like a recruiting firm. That slowly morphed to become, we just solve really complex technical problems. Putting out great products, building great teams, these all kind of go hand in hand to deliver business outcomes. So as time went on, I approached these conversations a little bit different, and the people that I were talking to changed as well, right? It started off as directors of Eng or VPs of Eng, and over time it's changed into VPs of product, VP of business development, VPs of marketing, people who have business agendas that are trying to execute and see engineers as kind of a means to an end to get stuff done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It makes complete sense. And when you look at I think most of our tech leaders' careers, we kind of go through that process where we're writing code, we're building a product to then we're becoming a leader. We're kind of envisioning the strategy of this product going forward and taking that to the next step of maybe even seeing how this impacts the business and what is the overall strategy of the company and how that relates to this. So you can have that growing phase that you go through in engineering.
Exactly. And I think the important thing with good engineers especially is those that have business sense, right? So being able to rope that in as part of the discovery process when you're thinking about new ideas, like having someone who understands what the bounds of feasibility are and has good business sense is a very, very valuable thing. And I think that's kind of the space in which we thrive.
No, I think that's absolutely, incredible that you say that, because I think it's really important for, tech leaders to have that business sense. And you can get it lots of different ways. I'm older, so I went through the traditional way of getting an MBA and going that route. But,
Right.
you can listen to podcasts. You can start understanding some of the terms and being able to speak to other business leaders to realize that, an engineer is not just a call center. We're not just an expense, but, we can bring value and insight. We should have a seat at the table on the board and being able to have those communications and understand, what is ROI and how does that relate to things, and how can we generate greater, ROIs based off the products we're doing, and what KPI should we be focusing on, and things like that.
Totally. And I feel like that mindset has kind of shifted over time. Like I remember, 3-4 years ago, when I was at, one of the climate tech companies, we hired these outsourced engineers, and we would never call them by name. We would always call them resources, right? And that's like a pretty toxic term to use. And it kind of paints engineers into this little box of almost being a code monkey, right? Like you have a list of things to do, tell me when it's done, and don't tell me anything more or less, right? And that mindset, I hope, has started to shift, at least in the Valley, where it's become more of, VPs and directors of engine are not just responsible for managing engineers anymore. They're responsible for managing full-on roadmaps, right? So products sit under them, design sits under them. They're responsible for executing end-to-end business delivery, right? And maybe they have their sales and marketing counterparts or BD counterparts or whatever, but they're still a big part of the process, right? So the mindset has kind of shifted, and especially at the senior level, it's becoming a lot better, even at startups, right? Now you typically see, a business co-founder and a technical co-founder, but the lines are so blurred, you have difficulty telling which one is which, in the good cases, at least. Obviously, there's the extremities where the technical co-founder likes to put his hood up, turn the lights off, and write code, but it's not always the case anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely has changed a lot over the last 20 years. And, and I remember, back when I remember working for a large company with, large for a tech company, but roughly 1,200 people. We got our first, C-level, engineering leader. It was just like, that didn't exist. CIOs and CTOs did not exist, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And now it's like, you have multiple C-level people that represent technology in different fashions, whether it be, chief product officer, chief digital officer, chief technology officer, chief information officer, CISO. You have all these branches now under technology that all have to understand the business concepts and bring information to the table that way.
Totally. And it's great, right? It's better for the business. It's better for eng culture. It just overall is a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I wanted to talk about that really got me excited when I saw your stuff was your kind of influence and background on climate tech and what's been going on with that. And I just wanted to let you spend a few minutes just going through kind of what is climate tech and why should us mid-level, senior level leaders in software development companies or engineers or orgs should be thinking about this.
Yeah, climate tech is an interesting space because there's definitely a lot of noise in it, right? And there's also a lot of innovation, and kind of shifting through the mess is difficult sometimes because everyone is, at the end of the day, when VCs put in money or PE puts in money or whatever, even if it's a climate tech idea, the end goal is to make money, right? So it's this weird balance of, I want to save the world, but I also want to make a quick buck, and sometimes it doesn't manifest itself in great ways. But in terms of like what climate tech sits and where it is today, the biggest, I think, section of that industry is something called carbon offsets, which is basically this idea of, if you pollute on the backside, you can buy these things called offsets, where, you basically undo the damage that your carbon in the air has done, whether that's through planting trees, doing sequestration, funding windmill farms, anything that offsets that carbon. So like as an example, at the first company I was at, EcoCart, they use that in e-commerce. So if you buy shoes from online, for example, from Nike, let's say, it'll look at what the material breakdown of the shoes is. So 50% polyester, 50% cotton, and I'm being facetious, but let's say it's coming all the way from India to be shipped at your front door. All of those things have a carbon impact. That all goes into a calculation, which basically says, okay, buying this shoe is going to emit 150 kilograms of carbon. I see this offset sitting in, Massachusetts for forest protection. That offsets 150 kilograms of carbon, and it costs 85 cents. So now I'm going to present a little checkbox to you that says offset the carbon footprint of your order, right? So like that from a consumer standpoint makes a lot of sense because it's digestible. Like, you're planting a tree, like it makes sense. You can visibly see the tangible climate impact of you checking that box. The flip side to that is the enterprise side, right? Companies will, for their employees or products or projects or whatever, buy carbon offsets in bulk on the backside. So Apple, as an example, at their last event, announced the Apple Watch being the first carbon neutral product. Does that mean it was manufactured in a fully renewable way? Probably not. What it means is they manufactured it likely the same way they have been before, maybe with a little less, fossil fuel dependency. They're maybe using more solar power or whatever and more recyclable materials. But at the end of the day, what they're doing is they're going out and market and finding 5 million kilograms of carbon offsets to make that order net neutral. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's also one of those things, like, especially when you talked about being able to put that checkbox in front of the customer, it's showing that you as a company are thinking about these things and you're willing to spend a little bit extra as a business to make sure you're leaving the environment in a better place for you being there than the opposite.
Right, exactly. And, it's all net positive. But some would argue that having carbon offset just as a concept actually encourages companies to not change their fundamental practices, right? Like, what's the point of shifting to renewable energy if I can just buy carbon offsets in bulk later on, right? And carbon offsets are something called projected futures, right? So like, it's this idea that eventually over time, it's going to offset the carbon. Like when you plant a seedling, like a small little tree, it's not going to offset the same amount of carbon as a full grown one, right? So there's like small things here and there that make carbon offsets a little bit unreliable. And I think, a lot of smart people are working on that problem and trying to close the gap a little bit. But as it sits right now, I see it as a weird intermediary until we get to the real solution.
Yeah. So do you think AI will be helping us get there or hurting us? Because I know there's this debate about how, AI is kind of taking some of the GPUs and energy costs that were being used for crypto and it's now kind of consuming that. Or do you think it's going to help us by finding better solutions?
A mix of both. It depends on how you look at it, right? Like if you looked at it almost like a boxed in kind of way, like if you just look at the idea of carbon calculations and emissions, AI will definitely help them make it more accurate over time, right? Whether that's through verifying the strength of the offset, verifying what actually goes into, like I said, creating a shoe, for example, AI will help with accuracy, hands down. But AI in and of itself also consumes a lot of energy. And like you said, uses a lot of graphics processing and all that kind of stuff. But I'm sure over time, like as the innovation curve continues, that'll start to slow down as well, right? So maybe there's a middle point, half a decade or a decade from now where, you kind of meet in the middle and you're on par with where you are with humans, and maybe over time it starts to get better and better. But in general, I think like AI proposing a new solution is more valuable than trying to fix existing ones. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Because if we, instead of just making small incremental improvements by trying to fix the existing ways we're doing things, if we come up with a revolutionary, radical change of how we do things that may be proposed by AI, then the underlying problem won't even be there.
Exactly. Yeah. And trying to fix like a fractured market is a lot harder than starting fresh, right? And I'm sure you've heard that before. And AI and climatetech are no exceptions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So what are some things that are new on the horizon when it comes to AI? I mean, we all hear about ChatGPT all the time and Midjourney and, generative AIs, but what about the other things that are happening?
Outside of Gen AI and climatetech?
Yeah. Like, as far as instead of generating, what about like analyzing? There's a lot that we don't hear about in the media that AI is developing, abilities to kind of find patterns and recognize things that we as humans aren't even seeing that are out there that could make, massive improvements in the future.
Totally. So, I mean, I'll just use credit cards as an example because that's where we do a lot of our work. A lot of the stuff that we do is centric around fraud and making sure that people who aren't supposed to be swiping cards are not swiping cards. And if they do, you're able to catch them. And like fraud monitoring and stuff has been around since the beginning of credit card time. But a lot of the times it's been a manual process. Then it sort of shifted into, regular old linear regression. And now there's these companies out there that are doing AI-based, fraud monitoring. And it's become very, very powerful. So kind of like you were saying, using AI for analysis instead of generation is very powerful, especially in credit card fraud, where you can basically feed AI tons and tons of data that would take, someone like you or I hours and hours to go through, and you get an output inside of a couple of minutes saying, hey, this is a fraudulent swipe or not a fraudulent swipe, and here's why. I think like humans are very bad at digesting tons and tons of data, and even worse at finding patterns within those data, right? Even before like AI and ML became these buzzwords, linear regression has been around for forever, right? Like it's just a basic math concept that people use in day-to-day life. And that's what we've been using for, analyzing patterns up until now. But it's shifted to become so powerful that you start identifying trends you didn't even know existed.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting to think about, because when I think about finding commonalities and trends and things that aren't there, we humans tend to always look in the same places. It's like I'm going to look that you use your credit card at this location, this location. And I remember when the first time, this is more than 20 years ago, I traveled international with a credit card. As soon as I swiped it overseas, it was like immediately like, you can't do this. You're out of the country. Even though I had called before, told them I'd be out of the country. And I know we still use some of those protections now, but it seems like nowadays we're smarter, we're better able to figure out like, oh, this person will be traveling because they bought a ticket for an airline. They paid for an Uber with his credit card to get to the airport. And, now we assume that they are traveling, and we can put those things together that we didn't have before.
Yeah, totally. And it's cool. And it's also like a little bit scary in a lot of ways, right? Like think about what AI gets to see now, right? If it's getting fed all of this unrestricted data, it's seeing where you are, what time you swiped your card, what you're buying. Like it's starting to create this idea of who you are inside of code, right? Like it knows that John likes to have coffee every morning at 9 o'clock at Starbucks, and at 9:30 he goes to the train and blah, blah, blah. I'll use an extreme example, but like if a hitman got access to that data, I mean, it's a super easy target, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is probably bad to say. I shouldn't probably talk about this on the show, but I will anyway. I've been listening to these Gray Man audiobooks that I heard about that are basically about an assassin. There's a movie on Netflix called Gray Man, and I liked the movie. I thought, it's interesting. And then it popped up in my Audible feed, so I decided to listen to them. And in some of those books in the series, they're doing the exact same thing, where they're taking like patterns that people have done and being able to predict where their location would be, because this is what they do now, and we know this information. And yeah, it is a little bit scary. And do you think this fear that some people have of AI is a justified or valid fear, or do you think it's something that's kind of like, there's too many people, there's too much data, is not relevant?
Oh man, yeah, loaded question. I think yes, at a high level, there is something to be scared about. But at the same time, I think the people that are working on these problems are quite smart and understand what data restrictions need to be put in place. But at the end of the day, right, the goal for AI is for AI to be smarter than humans, right? Which means them thinking of scenarios that we haven't thought of. So realistically, even if you impose all the data restrictions in the world and you have this ultimate kill switch that solves everything, I mean, if the point is to make it smarter than you are, there's definitely going to be something that you don't think about, right? Data exposure is a problem inside and outside of AI, right? Like that's why so many regions are becoming so strict about it. Like, Europe has GDPR, Canada has GDCA, all that kind of stuff designed around not leaking your data outside of places it's supposed to be seen. And AI is just going to compound on that problem because there's more data to feed in, more data to process. It's just so much that it's hard to keep track of it all, right? And I say it like it's pennies in a jar that you have to keep track of, which might sound a little bit silly, but in reality, like that's how data works, right? Like you have all of these data streams coming in from different places. It's very easy to, forget to close one off or not process one correctly. Like there's all of these edge cases that you might not have thought about that could result in a leakage.
Yeah. And that's really important to talk about. I remember I was listening to the Sidebar once. They were talking about data and data leakages and how it's more prevalent now than ever. And one of the things we have to focus on is, what are our employees doing with our data when it comes to tools like ChatGPT and the Bing bot, whatever else. And where I know I've seen where people will take entire contracts and copy and paste them into ChatGPT, ask it to summarize, and some of these things are really confidential and have confidential pricing and, things that should not be, let out into the public, and they just toss it out there with no idea of where it's actually going.
Right.
And one of the concepts they were talking about there is like data needs to be kept almost like it's toxic, and we want to keep it away from us instead of like gathering it all up.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because like when you look at data eng philosophy and data architect philosophy, the idea is to centralize it all, which might actually make the problem worse, right?
Yeah, it absolutely could if that's where the leakage occurs. But but it's all, the philosophy is that you can protect things if they're all together. A lot easier than protecting centralized or decentralized objects.
Yeah, fair enough. But also consider the case where a hacker gets in and he knows exactly where to look. He finds not just one thing, but he finds everything, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a good way to go out of business.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, have you guys worked on any projects when it comes to AI and concerns with maybe policies around that? Because with GDPR and you have to be concerned about confidential data, and I mean I'm seeing it from a leader in technology of a company where we're having employees that are using ChatGPT to draft emails and unintentionally putting PII information in there and things that we've got to be very cognizant of. Have you seen anything like that or had any experience with people working through those problems?
Yeah, one of the projects we worked on was for this big e-commerce company that does deliveries in Canada, and the information that we were feeding into this logistics system, which is AI generated or AI powered, is the location of every single customer inside the database, right? And so where they live, where they work, what their phone numbers are, what their names are, in a lot of cases what their driver's license numbers are, because you validate your identity and all that stuff. That all gets fed into this master system that goes in and says, okay, based on XYZ deliveries today, here is the optimal route to take. And you don't really need AI for that in a lot of cases, right? Like that's just shortest point mapping and all that stuff. But feeding it into that model was a pain and a half. You have to go through full-on government audits, almost like PCI audits inside of fintech, right? Where they're looking for leakages in credit card systems. It's the same thing for PII in Canada. I know in the States, like sometimes you can store PII without getting into too much trouble, but in Canada, like everything is gone over with a fine-tooth comb. So when they see especially location and name tied together, they start to get a little antsy, right? So you have to go through these audits of, okay, who has access to the system? What outside access does the system have? So like, can AI connect to the internet, for example? Can it, post things? Can it publish things outside whatever event stream it's contained in? All of this small stuff that, obviously we've thought about, but you get a little bit nervous when someone is evaluating your system that is foreign to it, right? Because they might poke holes that you haven't seen. So to kind of answer your question, yeah, it's a pain in the butt. Like it takes forever. It's a little bit scary if you've done something wrong. Because the worst thing for, someone like us, like a consultant that comes in, is to be the source or root of the problem of some sort of data leakage, right? That would just suck. It's bad for the brand. It's bad for the business. So you have to be so careful with all this small stuff that you're doing that, sometimes you get lost in the sauce almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I just got a little letter in the mail yesterday about some, I don't know, data leak that I was involved in. And I guess there's a class action lawsuit. It's just one of those things where it's like, is this the new normal? I'm going to get one of these like every month or two,
Well, sign up for the class action. Maybe you'll get a quick buck. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to. I think it's part of our responsibility to sign up just to make sure that, the more people that do participate in class action lawsuits, the more likely that other companies will take this seriously and try to protect their data, I think, going forward.
Yeah, 1,000%.
So what's next for Lightci and the things that you guys are working on, and what do you see this going up to? Because you guys have grown quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, we're still in growth mode. The idea is to kind of get to 300-400 people by the end of next year. And the way we get there is just by doing cool projects, right? So, we've covered a big part of the market on the fintech side, and now we're expanding into ed tech and health tech and all these other verticals that, have interesting problems to solve that also happen to be high impact. So, for me specifically, ed tech and climate tech kind of hold a special place in my heart. So that's kind of what we're going after. Not that the CEO always sets total and absolute direction or anything, but it's definitely where my interest lies. So I think the next couple of months, if not the next year, is all just about growth, hiring the right people, putting together the right team, and going after the right folks.
So I don't know if you know this, but I teach part-time at Winthrop University and computer science. Tell me a little bit about what kind of projects you're interested in when it comes to ed tech. I'd be curious just from a personal standpoint on that one.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've heard of IXL or Prodigy or any of those companies.
Yeah.
But a lot of what they do is around bottom-up learning, right? So the idea is, let's say you get presented with a question and you get the question wrong in flashcard format. Bottom-up learning basically says that, hey, we're going to tell you on the spot what you got wrong and why you got it wrong, and then educate you on what the correct answer is, right? The other approach is you do lectures and you do, seminars and office hours or whatever, and then you walk into a test where you might be unprepared because you've never gotten an opportunity to get stuff wrong before, right? So it's a little bit of a different approach, and psychologically it's shown to yield better results. So we're working on a couple of flashcard apps with a few clients. We're working on doing some AI-driven curriculum development for a few folks. So the idea there is you'll look at the student and where they are in their learning path and what their progression looks like, and then create tailored curriculum for them based on, you have the set question bank and set curriculum subjects that you want to teach. What order is the most effective to teach to the student based on the way they're recepting feedback and learning styles and stuff like that.
Awesome. No, I love that style of learning. I know I can think back, 20 plus years ago when I was teaching at York Tech, and, my college background was more, software related, and they had a course that came up. They wanted me to teach, Cisco networking, and I didn't know a whole lot about Cisco, but I thought, if I'm going to teach this, I got to learn it, and I need to learn it really quickly. So I went and did like a little boot camp. The big part about that boot camp was to take practice tests. But as soon as you missed the question, they would immediately prompt up and show you what the correct answer was and why this is the correct answer and explain it.
Right.
And, some people just memorized answers, but I would actually read through it all because I knew I had to teach this. And as soon as it's going to obviously ask me why this is the case, they always ask why. So I need to make sure I know this so I don't look like an idiot while I'm up there. So I would read all that. And literally in that 2-week period, I knew 4 semesters worth of stuff, just because I was able to kind of see the reasons why and drill that into my brain. Okay, not just that this is the right answer, but here's why this is the right answer. And now I get it.
Yeah. And I think the biggest problem we have is that people don't read these things, right? They'll get a question wrong, and the app is TikTok style where you can swipe up to get to the next question. They're just answering swipe as quickly as they can to meet whatever the minimum requirement is to, move on to the next subject. But yeah. A lot of what we're doing is we're trying to figure out, okay, what are they actually looking at? How far are they scrolling? How much time are they spending on each question? Based on that, they have more difficulty with XYZ questions versus the others. There's a lot of power in the data that's there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important to focus on. And if there's a way, I don't know how you'd be able to do this, but if you can get some, my motivation was I didn't want to look like an idiot in front of the students. Is there a way you can figure out the motivation and use that to kind of help make people actually read those things?
Yeah. If you put in goals at the beginning, right? I'm trying to get a 5 on this AP test on AP chemistry, let's say, right? We know now that the scores that we show you and the way we're grading you has to be relative to, a 5 on an AP exam, right? There's a certain mastery standard there that you have to meet.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It makes perfect sense. So, I love that. I love that approach of kind of rethink the way we do things. And, education is definitely up for some disruption for sure. And, we had a little bit of that with COVID. I remember, teaching. I was teaching in the classroom when all of COVID happened, and we didn't have you had some distance learning, but not a lot. And it was immediately within 1 week. Now we're all fully remote, and we're teaching all of our classes remote and make it work. And it was actually a really easy way for us to transition and get to that point. It happened a lot smoother than I thought it would. But yeah, there's a lot of areas for education to be disrupted, I believe.
Yeah, and remote education is quite powerful, right? It's kind of like remote work where the boundaries between life and work start to blur because you're in the same environment. It's the same thing with education, right? You're no longer bounded to just being at college or just being at high school or whatever. Even when you leave whatever the premises is, you still have all of the content and all of the educational information on your phone or on your laptop, right? So how do you leverage that in a way that's productive and still engaging for the student? Because I think a lot of what makes school and college and university powerful is the social aspect of it. but you don't necessarily get that when you're sitting at home alone going through an app with flashcards, right?
Absolutely. And also, with technology made distance learning, you're not just bound to learning in a classroom and having a lecture. You can also have audio. You can pop in your headphones and learn while you're riding a bike and things like that. I know that's where I get most of my knowledge today is, listening while I'm, exercising or something like that.
Right. Yeah. And being able to complement it with, everyday activities like, a lot of students might watch TV or listen to music or whatever it is in the background that is very powerful, right? So I don't think anyone has really figured out how to leverage that as part of the learning system or the learning cycle. But whoever cracks that problem, hopefully it's us, who knows, will definitely be in an advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope it is you guys, and I hope you do it pretty soon because, it's one of those areas where, I personally feel like the higher institutions and colleges is the ROI for that transaction is definitely diminishing. And, I'd like to see something change to where it becomes a lot more valuable.
Yeah, totally agreed.
This has been great, Zain. Thanks for coming on the show. If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about how they can connect with you online, learn more about what you guys are doing, and find out more.
Yeah, go to lightci.com or shoot me a message on LinkedIn. My phone number is in my LinkedIn bio if you want to shoot me a text. And my email is super accessible online. We're always hiring top talent, always looking for cool people to work with. So shoot me a message or go to our website, and I'm sure we'll get in touch.
Awesome. And I'll link that too in the show notes at geekleader.com so people can click through there. Zain, thanks again for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. I feel like I learned a lot.
Thanks for having me, John. Take care.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to, click on their links, and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. Make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.